Welcome to the Courageous Protectors podcast. My name is Lewis Arnold II. You all can call me Lou. I am so happy that you're here with us today. Today, I have someone special, a close friend of mine, Sam Hickey. He's going to introduce himself. As you know, we like to inspire people through stories of trials, tribulations, acts of courage. And we just like to share the good, bad, and ugly about our lives. So, Sam, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. I'm real good. Happy to be here. I'm glad you invited me to do this.
Yeah, man, this is it's a journey for myself, a journey for the both of us. I had this vision that some time ago about just sharing the stories of other courageous protectors, and man, one thing that I like to ask everyone when they join our show is, how's your morning been? What did you do today? What did you do last night? Anything courageous?
Not, well, you know what? If it's spending time with your wife and making sure she's happy is courageous, then absolutely. That's what I did last night. Pretty much what I do every night. So we just basically sat down together and spent some time together last night. This morning I got up and got ready for this. First thing in my morning.
Yeah, Sam, that is something courageous. Being a loving husband, man, is definitely part of being a courageous protector for us as men. So, man, can you do me a solid and go ahead and start with your story, with the beginning? Let our listeners and our viewers know, man, who you are. Show us, tell us where you come from.
Yeah, so I was the youngest of 8 kids, and my mom Shirley, my dad Verlin. We grew. My earliest memories are living on Hyde Park Avenue in Hyde Park, and I really my earliest memories probably start. Remember the big snowstorm of 1978? Those are probably like the earliest memories that I really have. I have some spotty memories of Christmases around the tree. Watched some shows when I was younger, um, little kid, and all my family being around my brothers and sisters. Um, but really, the snow of '78 that dumped all that snow across our city here in Cincinnati. Uh, really like the hallmark of when I started really remembering everything in my life from that point on. Um, my dad worked at a trucking company. He was a dock foreman, and my mom worked at a restaurant. She was a restaurant like a gossip. And I just remember pretty much the early part of my life was pretty normal. We had Christmases. My dad was working. He'd come home late at night. He would bring us gum and things he got from the vending machines at work. And then just remember going to see my mom during the day when she was working. We'd go visit her at work, and my dad would sit there and she'd bring me powdered chips, snack that they had there. And I remember eating those. Going out on the street and playing football with my brother Doug and um, just all my friends on the street. And we jump in the back of a pickup truck and go see drive-in, movies at Oakley Drive-In, which isn't there anymore. I'm sure you probably remember that place because you probably grew up in the same area. But pretty normal childhood from what I remember, and stayed that way throughout most of my life until I was in my teens. I started so my mother schizophrenia, and and my brother also too. My brother, he's the one I really first saw it in when I was a kid. And I remember him coming home and he would just talk to himself, or he would have this crazy laugh. And I was so young, I didn't really know what it was. But I knew it was different. Um, but anyway, we attended, Loveland Baptist Church. Those are my first memories of the church. I remember going there with my dad on Saturday mornings, and he would mow the grass. He had this little gold key he would get to the building with, and he'd go get the lawnmower, and I'd sit out in the field, and he'd try and play in the woods right next door to it. And then Sundays, my mom would teach Sunday school, so I'd go to Sunday school in the morning with her and break crayons up underneath the table while she was teaching. And then we go downstairs to the main service, and I just remember sitting there kicking my feet up and trying to understand what was going on. So those were my first memories of church. Uh, in my teenage years, probably my late 10, 9, 10, 11, somewhere around in there, we switched to Deer Park Baptist Church. And I remember like catching the bus, getting on the bus with other kids and taking these weird colored buses that had Mickey Mouse and all these different characters on them. And we would just go to church and same thing. I would go into a classroom at the church and Sunday school and learn all these different things. And then later on in the service, they would take us out. We'd sit in the pews and we'd listen to the service. Back then, man, you'd do Sunday school and then you'd go into the service and you'd still be in there for 2 hours. So
Mm.
I just remember that. I remember those early days. My life seemed pretty normal to me. Everybody was going to church and brothers and sisters are kind of moving in and out of the house because they were getting older. I was like, again, I was the youngest of eight. So my older brother, Wayne, was already gone at that point. He was already living on his own, had a wife. So essentially, things went that way till I remember I was 9 years old and I was at a service and my mom said to me, she said, that someone was getting baptized that day. And she said, don't you think you ought to get baptized? And I remember thinking in front of all these people looking up there, and I remember thinking, I'm scared to death. Like they were up there and everybody was looking at this person that was in there getting baptized. And, they were getting dunked under the water. I'd never even been in the water. So it scared me a little bit. I remember telling my mom, Mom, yeah, I'll get baptized, but how about we wait until I'm 10? And she said, well, what if Jesus comes back before you're 10? And so it kind of scared me. So I was like, well, I guess I better do it. So the next week or 2 weeks later, or whenever they did it, I ended up getting baptized when I was 9 years old. I
Mm.
had no idea what I was doing. I didn't understand it. Um, Obviously I heard about Jesus and who Jesus was in Sunday school, but I didn't really understand, you know, the, the, um, the pull towards it or what it meant or what he meant to me, what it meant in my life, any of it. I just knew that I had to be baptized in order to go to heaven. So going on from there, pretty much
Wait, hold on. You before you move forward, man, it sounds like that you have some fond memories of your childhood.
I do. I do. So if you ask my brothers and sisters, we'll get to this a little bit later on. My brothers and sisters didn't have those memories. They were more, they remember my mom being sick. They remember my brother being sick. They have different memories of the childhood than I do. So anytime we talk, and sadly, some of them have passed on now, but anytime we would talk growing up and as I got older, their memories were not very fond. But mine were fairly normal. Like I just remember having a normal childhood. So yeah, my childhood growing up was pretty normal. It was fun. I enjoyed the neighborhood we lived in. We had great kids that come around and play, and we run around and play wiffle ball and kick the can, and hide and seek, and football in the street. Like all that stuff was just a normal childhood to me, and it was great.
Can I ask you, yeah, just growing up, who were you closest to between, of your siblings?
My brother Doug was the one who was he's the next age up for me, and he was 4 years older. He was the one that I was kind of following around all over the place, and since he was older, he was also getting into more trouble as a teenager. So I know he would run out with his buddies, and I didn't really know exactly what he was doing. Most of the time, I wanted to tag along, and he'd say, you can't come," and I realized later on it was because he was going out breaking into cars and doing all kinds of sick stuff. But I mean, I looked up to him, man. He used to take me to his baseball practices and, he'd introduce me to his friends. And back then I had this long blonde hair and they would say, is this your little sister? He'd go, man, that's my brother, man. Cause my hair looks I look like a girl, I guess. But, yeah, I mean, he was the one I really followed around. And then, my older brother, Wayne, who was the oldest sibling, he was already out on his own. He had this, Z28. He was successful, bought his own house. He had all the gaming systems back then, Nintendo 64, whatever it was back then. So we'd go over there. He'd invite us over and he'd go play in softball tournaments. And we'd go to softball tournaments with him and ride around in his Camaro and his T-tops down. And uh, he was kind of like the cool sibling. He was like the oldest that we looked up to, and we wanted to be him because he embodied uh, success. To me at an early age, just looking at him, I wanted to be that. I wanted to be what he had. So again, like I had people to look up to. Uh, had a good childhood. I had brother to follow around. My sisters were kind of in and out of my life, in and out because they were living on their own. They were out on their own, running around. So, I mean, we had a relationship and they were my sisters, but we weren't super close.
That sounds like an awesome childhood, Sam.
Yeah, yeah, it was for me.
Yeah. Yeah, at least that portion of it, huh?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
All right. So you mentioned your early years, right? Then your teenage years, and you having an encounter. Like you're around 10 years of age, and you're baptized.
Yep.
Yeah, if you don't mind, continue and share more about that story. Continue on your journey, your life
Yeah, yeah.
journey.
I think going forward, like I said, I didn't really understand what being baptized meant. Um, but I did know this. This is kind of strange in my childhood, interesting fact. Um, the Commandments was on TV every year. Every Easter was on. And for some reason, I was enamored by that movie. Every time, every year it came on, every Easter, I would tell my mom, we're watching 10 Commandments tonight. It was a 4-hour long movie and it started around 6 or 7 o'clock. And it was always like a school night. You had to go to school the next day. So we had to get it in. But I was just enamored by that movie. And looking back, I remember that was my first real just thought of God. Like, wow, I got baptized and this is the guy that I'm supposed to be seeing later on, right? Like I remember being enamored by God and just how big he was and just this whole thought of heaven and another world. I didn't know what it mean to be saved or sane or anything like that. But I just knew that like I was enamored by God. So going forward, just lived a normal childhood until I started seeing my mom really suffer from schizophrenia. I started seeing things that I guess the other kids seen when they were growing up. So she would talk to herself and you'd have no idea what she was saying. And then, she would leave the house all hours of the night. You have no idea where she was going. My dad would be getting up in the middle of the night, chasing her down the street. She'd be knocking on neighbors' doors and stuff like that. So, I began to see that, and still going to school, still, trying to live my life. My brothers and sisters, all, most of them besides Wayne, had dropped out of school. So, you know, they would get old enough to get away from the house and nobody wanted to go to school because we didn't have any clothes. We were poor. My dad, at that point got early retirement. And so my brothers and sisters all quit school. Wayne was the only one who did, the older brother. So I remember thinking like, well, I'm going to finish school. That was my goal. I wanted to finish. I didn't want to. I saw what my brothers and sisters were doing, and didn't want to go that direction. I didn't want to go that route. It was involving drugs and all these different things. So I knew that success to me meant I had to finish school when I was going to do it. However, I had to do it. So moving forward a little bit, I was about 15 years old, and I remember my brother Wayne and his wife Lois coming to visit my mom. So we were living in Westwood at the time, and I was throwing his tennis ball up against the house, and they came over and started talking to me. Yeah, You know, no big deal. I thought they were going to see my mom, and all of a sudden, my sister-in-law says, "I said, well, mom's downstairs if you want to go talk to her." And she said, "What if we're here to see you?" And I was thinking, why would you be here to see me? So at that point, they asked and said, "Hey, would you be interested in coming to live with us?" And I think what happened was my brother Wayne obviously saw what happened to my brothers and sisters, and he wanted a different route for me. So he said, "I want you to come live with me. Well, you go to Deer Park High School." And up at that point, I was going to People's Junior High. I was set to go to Withrow. I was going to catch a bus from Westwood to Withrow because that's the school I wanted to go to. not even knowing I could do that back then, right? Like
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking, oh, I got to go to Western Hills because that's where I'm at. So
On the
anyway,
other side of town, huh?
yeah, yeah. But yeah, so he invited me to come live with him. And at that point, I talked to my parents about it. My mom said, I think it would be a great idea, great opportunity for you. And so I did. And so I went to live with my brother Wayne in ninth grade. And he pretty much got me through high school.
Mm. Yeah, that's I mean, it's kind of awesome to have a brother, right? A big brother,
Yeah.
someone that actually cares about you and recognize what was going on in your life. How did that affect at that moment in time? How did that affect you? Like, can you dig in and a little deeper about how that affected you? What was going through your mind at that time, if you can remember?
Yeah. Um, yeah. I just remember thinking that it was a good idea. I was old enough to understand what was happening. I was old enough to understand the conditions I were living in was not conducive to success. Um, I wanted to be successful. I wanted to get through high school and do the things that I wanted to do in my life. But living with my parents the way it was then, they were very, very poor. My mom was just in no condition to take care of me. And again, we see that, I was making decisions about where I was going to go to high school myself. And nobody was telling me, hey, you can't go across town on a metro bus to go to Withrow High School. So, which is interesting because that's where you went to school. But
Yeah.
anyway, um, so
Who knows? We maybe we would have ran into each
yeah,
other. You
yeah,
know,
yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
if you
Um,
played ball, we'd have been good, best buddies. You know.
yeah, yeah, I play a little football, play a little basketball. It's
Yeah.
pretty athletic as a kid. Um, so anyway, I knew going to my brother Wayne's, I knew that it was an opportunity. And life was different there. He was successful. He had a wife and kids, young kids, and a house, and it was not a dysfunctional house. And he worked, and I really think looking back on it as I got older and seeing how God is there from the beginning of your life. He's there from the beginning, and he guides you through life. It's not, I used to think you got all kind of weird messages when you were younger and in the Baptist church, and it used to be, you got to choose Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. That was the big message I heard, is that you had to choose Him, and and it only took the faith of a mustard seed to get into heaven. So once you accepted Him and said the sinner's prayer, you were saved, and that's all you had to do. And I did all that, up until that point. But as I got older in life, and even now reflecting back on my life, um, I realized that God had me from the beginning. I mean, I realized that there was a reason I was enamored by, the Ten Commandments. There was a reason that, I wondered what my baptism was about, the whole time. What was that? What was that? What was that for? What was I doing there? Um, so looking back on my time with Wayne, and then everything that's happened in my life through, until now, I can look back and see how God was guiding me and protecting me the whole journey of my life. Um, he knew the path that He wanted me to be on. He knew where He wanted me to be. Um, He protected me from a situation with my parents that probably would have led me down another path. Who knows if I'd have been able to finish high school? Maybe I would have quit. Um, Kind of strangely enough, I did have a sister who was telling me to quit. She was telling me, drop out, be like the rest of us and go get a job and all these things. And so anyway, I finished high school living with Wayne. And as soon as I did, I started working. Um, it, the, I started working with my brother, Doug, and Doug became my spiritual mentor at this point in my life. And I was probably 18, 19 years old. And my high school days, I didn't really think a lot about God. We weren't really going to church. Um, so I ended up working with my brother, Doug, and we worked at this place called Amberley House. And he was in ministry at that point. He is trying to get into ministry. He went to a Bible college here in Cincinnati, and then he went to one in Missouri. But he was trying to be a minister. So um, once I got, started talking to him every day, working with him, then the thoughts about spirituality were really coming into full effect in my mind. I was thinking about it every day, and so I started asking him questions. I started just, hey, what do you think about God? What do you think about salvation? What do you think about all these things? God coming back. That was the biggest one. When is God coming back? The second coming. I heard a lot about that. Kind of scared me because I think in my mind, I was really starting to have those thoughts about um, who God is and why is this so important to me? Like, why is it so? It was weighing heavy on me. It was something that I was thinking about a lot. And looking back, it was God. He was pulling on me. He was saying, "Hey, it's time for you to learn about me. You've been thinking about me since you were little, but now it's time for you to learn about me a little bit." So I would start asking my brother questions, and one of the big things was, like I said, the second coming. I remember I was having visions and dreams. I started having visions and dreams. I was living with my parents again because um, I was a little bit too old for Wayne's house, and his kids were getting older, so I had to leave. So I went back to live with my mom and dad, and I remember like there were several nights where I would wake up from sleep just out of nowhere in the middle of the night, and I would look up out the window and I'd see the stars in the sky, and I would think I was having uh, thoughts that he was coming back.
Mm.
And I didn't know what it meant. Like I was kind of scared by it. So at this point, I was going to ask my brother Doug. I'd say, "What do you think about this? And what is this about?" And he's having conversations with me, telling me about Jesus and telling me about our walk with Him and who he's who He is in our life, what it means. So at that point, I was 18 years old, 19 years old. And that's when I really started thinking about my salvation, what Jesus was. Up to that point, I had had a knowledge of him, but I wasn't being really pulled in any direction. You know what I'm saying? It was
Yeah.
all, I was not being pulled until I was 18 or 19 years old. And that's when I started realizing God's pulling me somewhere. He wants me to research this. He wants me to look into it.
Mm. So that sounds like that was a pivotal moment in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. When it came to, I was becoming an adult. I graduated. I was at high school. I was trying to get through college, trying to figure out where my life is going, all of this stuff. Uh, that's when really started to question all the things in my life, spirituality and everything.
So how did you respond to that? How did you respond to that call?
Um, I think for a couple years, Doug was going to a place called Landmark Baptist. And so I started going there for like Christmas plays, any kind of shows they were putting on. Um, I started, going there and obviously there was a draw to that. There was a draw to the Christmas plays and the Easter plays. And I was starting to go to church there a little bit with him. Um, and it was really, you know, still kind of like in a phase of what does this all mean in my life? Uh, but I knew that, Jesus was important. I knew that, I was understanding who he was more. I was understanding that what salvation meant. I was understanding how important Jesus was in our life. I still wasn't really reading too much of the Bible. Just trying to learn as much as I could with going to church and just feeling that draw of trying to, and it wasn't a constant draw. It was something that, I try and live my life here and I would have that over there. And every once in a while I'd be like, oh, I need to look into it. And it was something you could tell that Jesus was pulling on me through several years of my life into my adult. Um, and I knew who he was, and I would still talk about it. I remember when um, I'll get on that later, but I ended up meeting my first wife, Jane, when I was working at Outback Steakhouse, and she came in. Uh, I met her there and started dating. And right from the beginning, I was kind of struggling through college because again, I didn't have anybody helping me. I didn't have any organization. Um, So Jen's family kind of gave me, once I met them, just just a little bit of uh, organization and some, some help. So basically, they wanted to support me through college. And so they asked me why I wasn't going. I said, well, I'm trying to pay off my loans and took a break and all these things. And at this point I was 23 years old. Um, and so they paid for my college and started supporting me through school. They said, as long as you show us your grades, we'll continue to pay for it. And they did. And it kind of set again, looking back, God was working, taking care of me, what I needed to be taken care of, putting me where I needed to be on the road that I need to be in. Um, so they kind of gave me some normalcy, in my life and some direction. At that point, I kind of knew that me and Jen were going to get engaged and get married. You could tell that was kind of heading that direction. She had already graduated college and was teaching, and her friends were all getting married. So we kind of went that path. And I remember having a conversation with Jen one time, and we were talking about Jesus and talking about church. And she had mentioned that her mom was doing a Bible study. And I don't remember the exact wording that she used, but we were talking about Jesus, and I was put off by something that she said about something about him not being the only way or something like that. And I said, Jen, that's wrong. I said, Jesus is the only way. I said, he's the only way you can be saved. He's the only way to salvation. He's the only way you can go to heaven. And I only knew that from talking to my brother, going to these little church services. But I knew in my heart, right? I knew in my heart that's what it was. I've known it. I just believed that my whole life. Um, I knew who Jesus was my whole life. And at that point, it was written across my heart back then. I knew it was. Still wasn't reading the Bible, wasn't going to church consistently, but I knew who Jesus was. And I knew enough to say, hey, he's the only way. And so I remember Jen was always, uh, anything that was big in life, she would call her parents. And her parents had the answer for everything. So whatever her parents thought, that was the way it was. They went to a Methodist church. So I remember right after that, Jen was kind of upset with me because I said that. And she ended up calling her mom right there on the phone, right there and on the spot. And again, her mom was going to these Bible studies, and Jen didn't know anything about them, but she knew it was a neighborhood Bible study. And she called her mom, and she told her mom, she was, hey, mom, I need some direction. So this is what Sam said. And her mom confirmed. And Jen was just floored by it. So we ended up getting engaged, and we actually lived together before we got married. And we were starting to go to this church called Faith Evangelical Free. It's really like my first consistent delve into church, to going every week and knowing that I wanted that to be a part of my life and church to be a part of my life, making sure that I was going to the right church. I remember they handed out this pamphlet and it said on the back what they believed. And I read it, and it matched up with everything that I was thinking I believed and what Doug had told me, and, about God and salvation and Jesus dying on the cross. And I read the pamphlet, and I remember I went to Doug at work and I took it to him. And I said, man, can you read this? Tell me, do they believe what I should believe? Are they saying the right thing? And he read the back of the pamphlet, and he's like, yeah, man, that's it. Like, that's the gospel right there. They're teaching the gospel. So at that point, man, I knew then that the gospel had been in my heart. It was revealed to me at that point. I knew who it was. I knew what it was. I knew what it meant. It kind of came all together for me at that moment with that pamphlet and going to church and realizing this is who God is and this is my life going forward. And so I started following that, started going to church consistently. And I don't remember if we got married yet, but I think we had gotten married at that point. 1997, we got married. Still going to this church. And I told Jen that I wanted to be baptized. And, she asked me why, and she said, you should go talk to the pastor. And I went and talked to him, and he asked me why I wanted to be baptized again. And I told him, I said, I got baptized when I was 9. I didn't even know who my savior was. I didn't know, I had no idea what I was doing. I said, I was scared into it.
Yeah.
So he's like, well, I think that's a pretty good reason. So he set it up, and 2 weeks later, me and Jen were baptized on the same Sunday in front of her family and my family. And I rededicated my life at that point and got baptized.
Mm, praise God. That sounds like an awesome memory.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was. Was.
I mean, I can just see the expression on your face. I see joy.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So all throughout that time of your life, where were you working? Were you still working at the same place you met Jen? Like, what did your work life look like during that time?
So at that point, when I met Jen, I worked at a restaurant, and I had a couple side jobs outside of that, nothing meaningful. I worked at a couple more restaurants, and then I worked at Lens Crafters. I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. Um, I was trying to go to school and finish it, and that's all I thought. At the time, I was thinking radiology or some other type of work. I didn't know what I Jen's best friend, Cheryl, was Cincinnati. Cheryl Hart, probably work.
I do
Um,
know, sure.
yeah.
I know the
So,
name.
yeah, yeah. So, we were out one night, and basically we were talking, and she was talking about being a cop, and she had just gotten on at Cincinnati. She told me, she said at the time I was going by Tom back then. So she said, she goes, Tom, I think you'd be a good cop. And I'm like, really? Never really even thought of that. She's like, I think you should look into it. She goes, you know how to talk to people. You got good communication skills. You're physical, you're athletic. She's like, you have a lot of common sense. She's like, I think you should look into it. So at that point, uh, I started looking into Claremont College's police academy because that's where I was going, Claremont College. And I went, sure enough, they had a police academy. So I pulled up the information, and they had class coming up soon. And so I decided, and me and Jen, we're not married at this time. We're still dating. Because I remember, like, I didn't have a career, and it was big with her parents. Well, let's get you through college, and then, worry about that. So I looked in the police academy. It was coming up. I signed up for it. And police chief of Silverton at the time, Denny Race, my brother Wayne worked at Silverton. He signed off on it for me. Back then, you had to have a letter from a chief in order to get into the academy, not like these days.
Mm.
It's almost like a secret club. You know what I'm saying? Like, you had to be signed off on it. So he signed off on me, and I got accepted to the academy. And in January '97, I started going to police academy. And that was the route that God put me on from that point on.
That's interesting, man. So what did Jen's parents, how did they think about that?
I didn't really uh, say much about it. I think they thought, okay, well, if this is what you want to do, then, go do it. And, back then the academy cost, I want to say it was like $3,200 or something like that. It had some a cost to it, and I didn't have that money. So they obviously were like, hey, well, we'll pay for the academy. So they pretty much supported me through it by giving me the money to go. So I started the police academy, and 4 months later, I finished. I went to the full time academy, so it was 4 months long. And from that point, man, my career part of my life just took off. I mean, like a rocket. Uh, I got out of the police academy in May. I think I graduated late May or early May, and I applied for the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department in corrections. Uh, I don't know why. I was told that, like, that's a good place to start. Maybe Cheryl, somebody else told me. I have no idea. But I applied for it, and I applied for specials at the same time, not knowing the difference, what they were. I just knew that it was in uniform and you were going to be getting some money. So it was the start of my career. I got a rejection letter from the specials uh, almost a week later, and I was kind of disappointed in that. I thought, oh, it's going to be a lot harder than I thought. Well, then 2 days later, I get a letter that said, congratulations, you're going to be, an interview process for a corrections position, blah, blah, blah. And I ended up getting a phone call, setting up an interview, and within a month after getting out of the academy, I had a job at the County Sheriff's Department. Yeah, that's how it all started for me.
Man, can you think back and remember what was going through your mind at that time when you received
Yeah,
that phone call?
I remember thinking I made it. I made it. Going back and looking at how I thought about success early in life when I knew I didn't want to drop out of high school and I wanted to finish high school and I wanted to go to college. And, and then seeing how Jen grew up and she was already through college and had a career and seeing how like a functional family worked. And now I was a part of that. Like I just remember getting that letter on the official letterhead. I remember that letterhead, sign and lease. It was, I remember exactly where I was. I called down a day or so prior and said, "Hey, I just wanted to find out how the interview process is going, how how's it going? What am I waiting on?" They asked me what my name was, and I told them, and they said, "You'll be getting a letter in the mail." And I was like, okay, and I didn't know it. Kind of thinking rejection, but another letter in the mail. But I remember the mail coming. Went up Davis Road. I opened the mailbox. And I saw a big letterhead on the envelope, and I opened up right there in the hallway. I want to go back inside yet, so I opened the letter. Say, "Congratulations, you've been accepted to the class of blah, 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 Corrections Academy." And I remember just being just elated in my heart. I remember thinking, man, you did it. You got through the police academy and here you are starting your career. I was just so excited. So, I mean, that was the start of it, man. That was, I just remember I was so overjoyed. Uh, obviously wasn't thinking about God at this point. I was just thinking, you know, I did it. I did this, and then I'm successful. I'm getting, whatever. So once we got to the academy, then it started, and I knew what direction my career was going to take. That's when I asked Jen's mom and dad, if we could they were kind of, you know, let's let you get a job first and see where it goes before, but I, they were on board with it, but they wanted to make, they kind of controlled everything in life at that point. So they wanted things to go a certain route you know, before we did anything else. So, and I took that as a yes. So I went, so not long after that, I asked Jen to marry me. That was the route.
Sam, to hear this journey you've gone on, right? Childhood, uh, your brothers and sisters, some of them going a direction totally different than uh, what you wanted for your life, not even finishing school, not even finishing high school, to being, brought in by your brother who had success in his life and married with children. Uh, like you had an example to look forward to, right? Someone to look up to. And I can definitely see, from through your story, God being like these moments, these Kairos moments in your life,
Yeah,
these amazing, this pivotal moments in your life that sent you on a direction that's actually positive and great. And I can even see protectors like your older brother, right?
mm,
Like he was a courageous protector. He
absolutely.
brought, he brought you in and helped establish some direction in your life. And I can even see it with Jen's parents,
Absolutely. Yep.
offering up uh, their finances and their guidance. They sound like people who are protectors,
Yeah.
and in a sense, they were in your life to protect you, right?
Mhm. Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah, man, that's awesome, man. So after that, go to the academy, corrections academy. So as you think about your journey from that moment on, can you share any challenges, any tests that you may have had in your life? Anything that may have been challenging to the point where it almost broke you. Uh, yeah, just bring us on, take us on that journey.
So at that point, me and Jen were still part of that church and when we got married and we started having kids and we had Ryan about a year after we got married. Um, and then, continued on in corrections and still I was going to church and, going to the plays and all that at the church and still wasn't really too much reading the Bible, but I felt like I was doing. what I was supposed to do as a Christian. You're going to church, you're raising your family, you're working. Um, and this went on for, a large part of the first part of my career. I ended up moving, we ended up moving to Deer Park, and I ended up applying at Silverton, which ended up being a big part of my life. So I applied at Silverton, and I got an interview. I was down at the jail for 3 years. And I knew I wanted to get to the road. I knew that like that was my next step. Didn't want to be in the jail anymore. I wanted to get to the road. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to get out there and do the job. So I had this interview with Silverton, and it went really well. It was about a year after I had applied, so it was kind of a surprise to me when they called me. But I did go in for the interview, and after 5 week, 4 week process, I ended up getting the job. And it was my first job on the street. Uh, And, I blossomed, I flourished like from the beginning. I had my first pursuit one month into, it was my first day on my own. It was 1 month into my FTO, my first day on my own, and I ended up getting into a pursuit. And it was terrible. It was the worst pursuit, worst pursuit I ever got in. I didn't know what I was doing. Um, but, nonetheless, it started my reputation. I just, I was a guy who got into things, and I found the bad guys. Just, you know, I don't want to get too graphic, but people call you a blank mag, and that's what I was. I just got into things, and I was aggressive on patrol. Uh, oh, sorry about that. My little earpiece fell out on me.
Mm.
You still there?
Yeah, I'm still
Okay.
here.
So, essentially my career started taking off. My career started taking off. I was married now, and I had kids, and I had also going to church, and started really listening to Christian music. I started really getting into Jeremy Camp back then. It was about 2000 or so. Um, you know, the old school Jars of Clay and all those old bands back then.
Yeah. Mhm.
Christian music was becoming like a really popular thing back then, more than a big kind of like gospel music. But Christian music was really coming on late 90s, early 2000s. It was like a sound that was, for today. It was today's sound. So anyway, I was starting to listen to that music, and I was, into worship and into church, and uh, going to Christian concerts, and I was just living the life, right? Like that was the Christian life. That was Christian life to me. Christian life.
Mm.
Still what I was supposed to be doing, right? That's what I'm doing. Like, I'm you know, talking about Jesus and believing in Jesus, and I know who Jesus is, and He's a part of my life, right? Like I got my career, my family, and then I have Jesus too, and He's over here, right? And He's just a part of my life, and that's the way that went for until about 2008, 2009. Um, Life was great. We lived in a nice neighborhood. And we moved to Milford, and we had surrounded by family and friends, and big cul-de-sac of people that we'd go on vacation with. And just everything was normal. It's the way successful. That's the way it was supposed to be. So when you talk about brokenness, my first part of that came in 2000. I woke up, worked night shift. I woke up one day, sorry, just got straight out of sleep, and I was having a panic attack. Um, thought it was a heart attack. I didn't know. I was a pretty healthy guy. I was running every day, lifting weights. But I started having these panic attacks, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong. They ran all different kinds of tests on me. Couldn't figure out what was wrong, but I just knew that once a week I was waking up in these panic anxiety. Never experienced anything like that. Right? So just basically moving forward, just it kind of broke me a little. Like it was just it was something I didn't understand. And then I started thinking about, well, my mom was schizophrenic, my brother was schizophrenic. I started thinking there was a one point where I had a panic attack for four straight days. And I was thinking this was the beginning of it. my mom had a mental health breakdown. And I was thinking, this is what's happening with me. I'm at that age. I'm in my late 20s or 30s, whatever, early 30s. And I thought, man, maybe this is it. And a mental breakdown. So kind of got through those. Took about a year. Different. Started medication back. A little bit of therapy, trying to figure out what's going on. In 2010, things really started to change uh, for me. I ended up getting a divorce. Started a divorce process. Wasn't happy. Wasn't Life wasn't fun to me anymore. I mean, we come home from vacations, and instead of going out to the cul-de-sac, uh, talking to people, I was isolating myself. I said, "No, I'm gonna stay in here, sit, live, stay in here." So I started isolating myself. It's just 2008, 2009. No idea why. Um, I started isolating myself. I wasn't happy anymore. Want to work, and I was still doing my job, but I wasn't. Something was going on, and I couldn't figure out what it was. Uh, but I was functioning. I didn't feel like I was having a breakdowns, but I knew there was some depression going on at the same time. Could not figure out. So in 2010, I talked to my wife and said I wanted a divorce. Ended up getting a divorce. A lot of things happened over the course of the next 8 years um, that really, you talk about being broken, really tested my faith. Really just was a time in my life that fell out of the boat. I was Peter, fell out of the boat in the water. Scared of the storm. What was a lot of things in my personal life were changing. Uh, Went through the divorce. I became a lieutenant at the same time. So I was trying to deal with being a lieutenant and dealing with divorce. And then whirlwind of things at that point. Silverton started to fall apart. Uh, they were be taken over by the Hamilton Sheriff's Office. So in the midst of getting divorced, I got remarried a year and a half later to my wife. And then her kids' fathers passed away. So I ended up taking on her kids. Uh, so stress, another stressful situation, but we're going to make it work. I loved her. And so we went forward. Uh, Silverton ended up collapsing 2015 and Sheriff's Department took over. So I was absorbed by the Sheriff's Department and really just tried to make it work. I knew I was struggling. I knew things were hard, but I was still, going to church. I was still going to Christian concerts and praying and trying to, work my way through all this. So I think the breaking point, I remember being at the Sheriff's Department. I was there for 4 years. And I think the breaking point was just there were so many things that were happening and I couldn't process. Um, and so I was drinking really heavy. I was really just having a bad, difficult, uh, trying to make my life work and make sense. Um, but I could see something was happening and I could see I was heading down a certain, but I did not stop it. I didn't know what to do. Praying and saying, God, why is this happening? But it really came to a breaking point in 2018. And I ended up getting, I'm going to go back a little bit. 2015, I ended up getting an OVI. It was the first time in my life I ever got in trouble, ever dealt with anything like that. But, I look back on it and it was obviously,
Explain what a I'm sorry. Explain what an OVI is for
yeah.
those
So
of you that may not
that's
know.
operating a vehicle while intoxicated. One of some buddies from the Sheriff's Department. On the way home, I ended up getting stopped by a friend who worked at the Sheriff's Department. And, looked at him and told him, hey, you got to do your job. Understand, understand. I was intoxicated. I was drunk. And I was knew from that point on, and I had been struggling. And I knew uh, that I was kind of heading that direction, with my drinking and the way things were. Um, so anyway, I get the OBI, and the sheriff's department pretty much says, "Hey, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, get you through this, get back out there and start doing, it," And I did. I went back out, started patrolling again, did the legal process with the OBI, had some probation, some fines I had to pay. But it really started, it, it did something inside of me that I think began a, um, a progression of fallenness, a progression of um, getting to rock bottom that really started. Um, so I'd go to work. It was drinking heavy, trying to deal with whatever was going on inside of me emotionally. Uh, and I remember just being in the darkest place. I would go to work, and I remember there was just a cloud over. Remember how heavy. I remember thinking, as long as you have this job, man, you're good. As long as you have this job, you're going to be fine. And so I kept going to work, but I wasn't really productive. Uh, I wasn't happy in it anymore. Wasn't finding joy in it. I used to find so much joy going to work and doing the things that I was doing. And I remember I switched districts a couple times, and then I switched positions. I went into CIS, the investigative section, and I became a crime scene tech. So I started doing that, trying to do something different to get out of this funk that I was in, this road that I was going down, and nothing seemed to work. Uh, and then in 2018, I went to a casino with a bunch of guys, and just getting drunk. And, me and another guy were there. We got dragged out of the casino. I still to this day don't have no idea why. Being on my phone, the security just grabbed me and drugged me outside. I just all the years of what I'd been struggling with came to a head. And I remember I went outside and was surrounded by all these deputies that I knew, and uh, I broke. I broke. Started yelling and screaming and cussing and very vulgar words. And I knew it was my way of screaming just at the top of my lungs, like something's wrong and something's wrong. And you guys, you're not seeing it. No one's seeing it. No one's helping. No one's there. And I ended up getting my wife came to pick me up, and I ended up getting her citation to go to court. Long story short, it wasn't a couple months later where I was out of law enforcement. I tried to switch departments. I went to this little department named Leeds, which doesn't even exist anymore. Uh, and I was there for about a month. And I resigned from that job, and I was out of law enforcement. And I had met you not too long before this. You and our friend Sean. We had started a Bible study. We'd started a first responders group. And I remember like thinking the things that we were talking about in the group uh, about helping officers who were having mental health issues, or really, I think it was more focused on if there was like a line of duty, what are we going to do for those families that lose the loved one? So I believe there was a couple like law enforcement deaths in that time. We were kind of thinking, what can we do? As Christian men, what can we do?
Mhm.
And I remember going to these things and just, I was part of it. Uh, and I wanted to be a part of it, but man, I was so broken inside and struggling that I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was living two lives. I felt like I was trying to go do this and do what God wants me to do. But I was this broken soul, man. I was completely broken, shattered. And I didn't know what I could, I didn't know in my state what I could do to help anybody because I couldn't even help myself. Um, so I remember we had some conversations, and I'd gotten out of law enforcement. Sean was super huge during this time in my life. He was meeting me every week. Every Monday religiously. We would meet at Crossroads Church, and we would pray through things. We would talk about it. He was really beneficial to me for like a year because he was steady. He was rock steady. And I don't think you at this point, I didn't know you well enough to kind of share the things that I was sharing with Sean. I knew him a little bit. I knew him a little bit longer than I knew you. And I was kind of afraid to share with the group. It was a lot of first responders, and I was afraid to say anything. I was around a bunch of cops, man, and I hated law enforcement. I hated it. I thought, man, these people don't care about me. They don't care about what they're saying. They don't care about mental health issues. Here they got this guy struggling right in front of them. They don't care about it. That was my thought process. Um, so I remember at the time we talk about Christ relationships. I remember there was a time when I was with Glees, right before I got out of law enforcement, I was going to the track at Taylor High School every night. I was walking around the track, and I remember looking up at the sky. You remember when I told you about Jesus coming back when I was younger? One of the things I did was I always looked at the sky to see the stars. And at this point, I was doing the same thing. I was walking around the track, looking at those stars, looking at the moon, and I was asking God. I said, God, I don't know where you're. I felt like I couldn't feel him at all. Um, and I didn't know where to turn, but I knew that if anybody was going to get me through this, it was going to be God. And I had to stay faithful to that. I had to keep seeking him, um, because I knew that no one was going to help me but him. So kind of going forward a little bit, I was out of law enforcement. I was struggling. I started working at a couple different places that just weren't a fit for me. They weren't a match. Still going to church, still trying to go to Christian concerts, still trying to put a smile on my face, still trying to make it work, praying to God every day, but also thinking very deep at that point. I didn't know. I was lost. I was almost 50 years old, man. I was lost. And I remember I just kept plugging away. I ended up get back, finish my degree. Looking back on that, I remember specific things when God started talking to me again. I remember words popping into my head when I'd be at work. When I got the specific job, I remember it was pretty easy. It was right before COVID hit. And I remember sitting at this desk by myself, and I was looking at Bible apps and stuff like that, still trying to pray. And the word rest popped into my head. And it was over and over every day. Rest, rest. You're here to rest. Get your head together. This is an easy place for you. I've got this. Go through school. I believe God set up me going to school so he could get my mind off what was going on in my life and set me in a new direction. So he opened up that opportunity for me to go back to college. I did it online. And I believe that was the starting point for God, really reaching out and rescuing me, stepping down into my mess, coming down from heaven. That's what I felt like later on, looking back on it. I remember thinking he stepped down from heaven and stepped right into my mess and rescued me. There were a couple other, visions and things that I saw, words that he was giving me. And I don't recall them now, 7 years ago. So,
Yeah.
but he was talking to me. He began to speak to me. And it was through words. It was through visions. He was starting to show me to get back to where I need to be. So I went to college for 2 years, worked at this place through COVID, and they were paying for college. So you have to think about, like, me and Molly didn't have any money. I had what little money that I made in there. COVID was hitting, so nobody was working. Everybody was at home. And while COVID was going on, I was going to college because this company was paying for me to go to college, and I was finishing my degree. And it really got me back focused. It really got me back to, okay, things are okay. God's talking to me. He's got me on a path. And I remember for 2 years, that's all I did. I went to school and I watched Netflix, locked up in the house like everybody else. Um, so, and back then there was no church going on. You remember that? There was no, you
Mhm.
couldn't go to church.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, you couldn't show up
I
to a
worked
physical
for a
church.
church at the time.
Yeah, I believe you were
Yeah.
Crossroads then.
Yeah.
Um,
Crossroads, no, Missio Day. Actually, I was at Missio Day at
oh,
the
is that
time.
where you were? Okay, yeah, because
Yeah.
I remember you asked me to come there shortly after that because I was at
Hmm.
Crossroads for a lot of years. And I wasn't really feeling Crossroads anymore. I'd been there for 10 years probably. And there was something about it that I wasn't feeling anymore. Um, but either way, um, you had asked me to call, or you had called me and asked me to come to Missio. And Lou, you were one of the people that, um, there were several things that you said to me. You talk about courageous protectors, right? There were several things that you said to me during my time there because I was going to school. I started this church with you. You had started there. You were actually working there, community construction or something. And it was me following you there. And I knew that this was a time in my life where God was speaking because there were things you were saying. One of the first things you said to me, um, when I got out of law enforcement, you had heard the situation and we were sitting there with Sean, Crossroads Church in East. And, I was telling you what was going on. You had said, the verse you said to me was, God will restore what the locusts have eaten. You gave me that verse. I remember hearing that and thinking, all right. Okay. I hear it. I hear what you're saying, and it was right. At that point, I was so far from,
Hmm.
um, and then I remember being at Missio and I was getting ready to lose my commission because I'd been out of law enforcement. And I remember talking to you, Missio. You had left law enforcement to get into the ministry. And I was getting ready to lose my commission. And I remember asking, I said, Lou, I said, man, how did it feel when you lost your commission? You were like, man, it wasn't a really big deal. You're like, I got out of law enforcement. I knew it was going to happen. Like I chose this path. So yeah, it was weird, but like I chose to come this path. Yeah, I remember thinking, yeah, you're right. You're right. And you said to me, you said, Sam, if God wants you to be a police officer, you're not going to need your commission anyway. He's going to put you back in it. If that's what he wants you to do, that's what you're going to do.
Hmm.
I remember hearing that and thinking, ain't no way, dude. Like, there's no way, right? Like, I'm getting ready to lose my commission, Lou. I'd have to go back to the academy, all these things. And I was so far double law enforcement at that time, man. Um,
Hmm.
Still angry at it, still resentful. Just, I was moving on in life. I was getting ready to finish my degree. I was trying to find a new career in occupational safety and health. I was kind of excited about it, my new path in life. And I was going to Missio, man. I was writing down notes. What was the pastor's name there again?
Kurt Hanna.
Kurt. Yeah, I remember listening to him, and I liked him. Every week, I thought he had a great message.
Yeah.
I remember things he was saying were relevant to what I was going through. Which, if you think about it, man, anytime you go to church and you're a Christian, those messages are always something relevant for you and what you're
Yeah.
going. I don't know if that's true for you, but every time I go to church, the messages.
Oh yeah, hits
Uh,
me right in the gut, brother. It's
absolutely.
like someone punching me
Yeah.
directly
Yeah.
into my stomach. So yeah.
Yeah. Um, long story short, it wasn't too much later. This was a big turning point in my life. And, we talked about how God was kind of stepping into my rescuing me. I remember there was a moment I was in the shower and I was praying. I was 49 years old. I was coming up on my birthday. And I knew I was going to be graduating college soon. And I remember being in the shower and I prayed and I said, God, I said, I don't know what your plans are for my life. Um, but God, before I turn 50, I'd like to know what direction I'm going. I said, I don't want to be in my 50s trying to figure out what I'm doing. I'm too old for that. And I said, please, you know, show me a path. Show me where I'm going to be. What am I going to be doing? The new direction I was heading. I knew I was trying to find a job with OSHA or something like that. agree. But I really I wanted God to finish what he had started 2 years prior. So what are we doing with this? And I began seeing this calendar. This is going to be a weird story. But I remember seeing this calendar, and I was trying to picture the future down the road, and God would not let me see past November that in the calendar. It was blocked off. Like I just kept seeing, like anytime I tried to envision the future, all I saw was to November, and I couldn't see the calendar. It was an actual literal calendar in my head. I saw the month of November on it. And December was blocked out. The rest of the next years are blocked. And so uh, I ended up getting this call from Kettering Health Network. And it was in November. And they called me in November and said, "Hey, are you still interested in working?" And I don't even remember applying. It must have been something I did online one night, when I was broken and just looking for jobs and searching, whatever. But somehow I applied for this job at Kettering Health Network and picked, I don't even know where Pickwa is. So I said, yeah, I'm interested. I wasn't making a tough go. They'll hide again.
Mm.
Hopefully you can edit that. Anyway,
Yeah.
I remember, I said, yeah, I'm not making a ton of money where I'm at. Oh, he told me what they made there. And I said, yeah, I'm interested, you know, and, he said, okay, we're going to, start the process. Look into your background. He sent me some information to fill out. I filled it out. I remember he called me back a couple times to verify some stuff. And in the middle of December, he called and he wanted a big explanation on the OBI. So like wanted big, long explanations. And, so I wrote him out and he called me back. He said, "Hey man," he's like, "I ran this by the captain and, he believes in second chances." He's like, "So we're going to give you a second chance. We're going to start looking into it." I said, "Great." Um, he called me back maybe a week later and said, "Sorry, man. Like it was too much. It was too much. We read it. We looked into it. It was too much. Like we just we can't put you in here, and, sorry, sorry to waste your time, whatever." And I totally got it. I understood it.
Yeah.
And I remember getting that call and I remember praying. I was on my way home, Western and Southern. And, I said, "Okay, God, made it clear. That's not the route you want me to take. So, show me where to go. Show me what to do." And this really started the process for this next 5 years where God has opened every door, showed me the path and just let me follow it. I mean, to this day, um, it was about a month later and I got a call from a major up there and, he called me and said, "Hey, why don't you come up for this interview?" And I remember thinking, it ain't me. I got kicked out of the process. So I called him back, left a message, said, "Hey man, you got the wrong guy." Um, this went on for a couple days, calling the detective, calling the captain of investigations to make a long story short. But anyway, the captain finally said, "Look, man, just show up to the interview, show up to the interview." It was Friday, you know, I said, "Okay, fine. I'll go up." So I go in, I meet these three majors and we start talking about college basketball. And then me and another major start talking about churches, what churches we go to. And he started talking about Bible study, all these different things. So they open up to this file, employee file, background file to do this interview and says the name, but that's not me. He said, "You're not so-and-so." And he looked at the picture in there and I said, "Nope, that's not me." He goes, "Well, who are you?" And I said, "Sam Hickey." He said, "I called you the other day." And I said, "I told you you had the wrong guy." He's like, "Well, no, I got your file in here somewhere." So he goes into his office and bear in mind, Kettering Health Network's a big network. I had to go to Dayton for this interview. Where my file was in a completely different location miles away. It wasn't even close to where he was. he comes back and he goes, I don't have your file in there. He goes, but somehow I got your name and your number. And the one major who we were talking about Bible study looked at me and he goes, there's a reason you're here. Yeah, absolutely. So, so he came back and he said, I can't find your file. And he's like, but do you care if we go ahead and do the interview anyway? I said, yeah, let's do it. I'm up here. So we interviewed and they asked me, they said, hey, tell us why you got out of law enforcement. So I told them the whole story and we left and he walked me out. He goes, Sam, I'm going to be talking to you again. And I said, okay. And I shook his hand and I walked away. And I remember I started crying. I was walking back to my car, man. I was just bawling. I said, God, how did you? I was in an interview I wasn't even supposed to be in. And so that started the road of me. They called me back a week later and gave me an offer. And it was double the money that I was making. I had just finished law enforcement. I had just graduated. And God answered my prayer about where I was going to be before I was 50 years old. Unreal.
Unreal, man. Wow.
So, long story short, man, from that day on, man, it's just, God's been opening doors. I remember working in the hospital. I was working in the emergency room and my uniform on again, right? Never thought I'd wear a police uniform again. There was. And
Yeah.
I was still thinking like, okay, Kettering Health Network, it's got to be a job for occupational safety. That's what I kept thinking. Kept looking. But you know what? I'm going to back up a little bit. This was before I turned 50. I was on a Kettering Health Network. I had seen another calendar. So I was working at Kettering Health Network and I kept seeing a highlighted calendar and it was going into November again. And I remembered it was weird. I kept thinking I was in, I just started Kettering Health. I was seeing this calendar again. It was lit up to November. I couldn't see past it. And I was still finishing college at that point. So I think I jumped a year ahead. I was still finishing college. I was still in college at that point. I was finishing up my degree again. I was doing the homework while I was in the office, doing my job. So I remember seeing Middletown police officers come in and they were bringing these people in to get, if they were drunk or they were hurt or whatever during the arrest or whatever. And I remember seeing them and I remember thinking, and this is going to sound brash, man. And I don't want it to sound, but I remember thinking, I can do this better. It wasn't a statement of, you're not good at this. It was a statement of, I was really good at this. And I remember thinking, and I remember at that point, God was telling me, get ready. You're going back to this. I remember thinking, and he was telling me, you're going back to this. And at that point, I'd finished my degree 10 days before my 50th birthday. And I had gotten a call from some people at Laughlin who I knew, and they were looking for police officers. And I went and interviewed in early November, and I got a call back saying they were going to hire me. So yeah, before I turned 50, God had let me finish my degree, and he showed me what path I was going to be. I mean, just if you think about how, where God is during that time, struggling, it's dark, and it could be for a long time, even for a couple of years it was for me. I think the story of faith is perseverance, not giving up. We think about faith, we think about Christianity, and we think about our walks. We see other people, right? We see pastors, we see people who have it all together, podcasts, or they got big churches and all these things, and you see those people, and you're like, man, these people can't ever struggle. What do they struggle with? What they struggle with? They say a cuss word every now and then. What are they praying? What are they going to seek forgiveness? But the fact is, God showed me the essence of Christianity is struggle. it's struggle,
Mm.
because in that struggle is when God does his work. You're at your broken, you're at your bottom point, you can't see anything else. You can't go down any further. And you realize that you're on your knees. And that's where God wants you to be. God wants you to be, he wants you to be in a place of discomfort. He wants you in a place where you have to seek him out. You don't have any other choice. There's nothing left. You can't do it on your own strength. The friends you had are not, not that they don't care, but they don't see what you're going through. They don't know how to help even. Um, and that's okay. I used to be so angry because I thought, why don't anyone see what I'm going through? Why isn't anybody helping me? Where's the hands that I'm supposed to be? They're reaching out to me.
Yeah.
And God said, me, you
Mm.
only need me. And that's where I went. That's where I went. When you start praying and you start really realizing what God is looking for from you, which is a relationship, which is something that you seek him out for, not just because he's a part of your life or a piece of your life over here that you go to when you go to church on Sunday or you go to a Christian concert, that he is the center of your life. That's what he wants to be. And that's what he became to me. And you start following him, the path out of brokenness, the path in your life that you ask him to light up, it just becomes so bright. You realize what God's doing. Doesn't mean that you're not still struggling. Doesn't mean that you're not still having hard times or that you won't. As a matter of fact, you're gonna struggle as a Christian. You're going to realize that you're struggling with things and battling with things that you know we're struggling with. Not with the flesh, right? Like this world, we're struggling with outer realms of evil. That's what we're struggling with. And you know, we have an internal battle that rages every single day inside us, every day. And it's pretty much where I'm at now. It's put me back where I'm supposed to be. And, he's being glorified through what he's done in my life. And, I'm doing good things in law enforcement. I can't believe I'm back in it. Um, and not only that, like, I'm doing good things. I'm doing the work that he called me to do back, when I started. He's finishing the work that he started.
Yeah. Yeah, Sam, it looks like you're a living example that the Lord does restore the time that the locusts took away. He did.
100%.
He restored it in your life.
Absolutely.
And,
He
your
continues.
life, he continues to do it. And our friendship, your life, our friendship is just extremely valuable to me. And I love being able to look at you as an example of what it means to stay steadfast in that walk as you walk and you pursue Jesus and you live your life out your best, the best of your ability
Yep.
to be a courageous protector, man. So, man, I thank you. I thank you for your relationship. Thank you for taking time out of your day to conduct this interview. And yeah, man, I love you, brother.
I love you too. And I
I
appreciate you.
appreciate your
Appreciate you
time.
having me on here. It was
Yeah,
good.
man, this was
It's
good.
good to
This
talk
was
about.
good. Yeah, it
It's
was
good to
good to hear
glorify
your
God and what he's
story.
doing, man. What it's all
Yeah,
about.
man. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And I definitely have heard things and learned things today about you that I did not know.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. So I appreciate it. Everyone, I want to thank you for joining us here at Courageous Protector. Whether you are listening to us or you're watching us online, let's continue to be courageous protectors.
Amen.
That's a wrap on this episode of Courageous Protectors. If you enjoyed this episode, please share this episode and podcast with your friends and family. Please encourage them to subscribe also. Let them know how much you enjoyed this podcast. We're trying to grow a community of courageous protectors. Until next time, stay strong, stay courageous, and be blessed.